Hello, this is kind of a weekend presentation special, economic-wise. It'll run in the same, what seems to be a bit of a theme, United States, Europe, and then the UK. It's going to be long, but I think it's a real good one, so you can drop out or stick with it as you feel. Let's start in the United States with a chart that's worth pausing and having a damn good look at. In the background there, in the red ziggity-zaggedy, is GDP. And Doug Short, the maker of the chart, has plotted it with that black pointy line, showing that really it's now trending down and has been since 1981, let's say. Debt needed to create $1 of GDP started back in 1952, the blue line, at nearly nothing, 30 cents, something along those lines. And it's cranked up, and in 1981 it went through the $1 of debt was needed to create $1 of GDP. And since then GDP has been going down and the amount of debt has been increasing and going up and up. And now it needs over $4 of debt to create $1 of GDP. A very interesting chart. I hope you agree. Moving on. Many of you that follow economic interblogs things will have found that the Clinton era documents are out where they were discussing, oh dear, what's going to happen when we pay down the entire United States debt? Will there be ramifications, etc.? Now, luckily, Prag Cap has done an article on this, so we can have his view on it. The sectoral balances have been put up on the Prag Cap article with the Clinton era encapsulated there, with domestic private sector balances in blue. Now I think that's the idea. I'm not too sure on this chart, but I think that's the idea of the sectoral balances, that you want the domestic private sector balance to be high, because I think that means savings for the blue team, the people. And you can see from through the Clinton era, it just went down and down until they were going negative. In other words, dis-saving in the private sphere. Back on Business Insider, who is the same article about the same documents, I've pulled this chart, which is the US government debt in trillions, actual and projected in spotty. And at the time, this is how they thought it was going to be. Around about now, the US debt was going to be zero. And the dark red line is how it is actually, in over 10 trillion instead. Something went wrong with the CBO. I forget whose projections these were, but they were wrong. FT markets, central bankers must update outdated analytical toolkit. Gillian Tett. Getting down to it, because we're relying now on government and central banks to pull us out of these economic malaises, what we've got now. Yes. So Gillian Tett gives us this article. I'll read you a chapter, paragraph from the middle of it. The essential problem is that the crisis has tossed central banking into an intellectual limbo. And because I'm short of time, I'll go on. Talks about Alan Greenspan being the maestro, and they overestimated the power of short-term interest rates in controlling the economy, and they thought, wrongly, they could shape monetary policy by watching national issues alone. Basically, it all seemed to go well, and they thought they were curing everything and doing everything well, but in fact, they weren't. And now they are, as Gillian Tett says, in an intellectual limbo at the world's central banks. The Fed are doing brilliantly, but they're still not quite up to speed with the new happenings. Just throw in here, because it's Gillian Tett again in this morning's Financial Times, is there a shadowy plot behind gold? The idea of a central bank manipulating world markets packs an increasingly powerful emotional punch with voters. So follow the link if you want to read that. Gillian Tett. Marvellous. Wall Street Journal, Fed is poised for more easing. And now this is John Hillenrath. So if Hillenrath says the Fed is thinking of doing something, the Fed are thinking of doing this and probably will. Federal Reserve officials are starting to build a case for a new program of buying mortgage-backed securities to boost the ailing economy, though they appear unlikely to move swiftly, but it's certainly on the table. Simon Johnson, Huntsman's warning on too big to fail. I've really put this in because it's one of the first decent articles Simon Johnson's written for a while. But let's just go down to the bottom. Clear statement by John Huntsman in the Wall Street Journal on regulatory capture and its consequences. And before the 2008 financial crisis, he wrote, the largest banks were pushing hard to take more risk at taxpayers' expense. And you can read the rest of the article and follow whether the politicians are going to get along with the Occupy people and be populist, and will that ultimately do any good? Note back, I haven't left it. At the top of that, I'll read it. The idea that big banks damage the broader economy has considerable resonance on the intellectual right. Thomas Hernig, the recently retired president of the Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas, has been our clearest official voice on this topic. And Eugene Farmer, the father of efficient markets' view of finance, etc., saying that too big to fail, and perverting activities and incentives, and a license to increase risk where the taxpayers will bear the downside and firms will bear the upside. Nothing that we don't know about, everything that they are screaming about on the Occupy here, there and everywhere things. But that was Thomas Hernig, and he has International Business Times News. Obama has nominated him as the number 2 at FDIC. Link number 9, Financial Times, banks pay out guaranteed bonuses despite the ban. That's in London. They're just getting round all the ban regulations in tricky ways. And I'm sure they will in the United States as well, although the bans aren't in place there. Banks, 1.5 billion Dexia loans, and I'll read the first paragraph. Dexia, that we've been speaking of for a couple of weeks, the stricken Franco-Belgian lender, has been at the centre of recent market turmoil. Apparently, it loaned €1.5 billion, that's money, €1.5 billion of fresh capital to its 2 largest institutional shareholders, which then used the cash to buy Dexia shares. Now, that was in 2008. Very naughty. Banks, again, from the Financial Times, French banks urged to raise Greek debt haircut. The French are writing on their accounts the 21% haircut write-down, where German and UK banks have accepted that the losses are going to be more and are writing down nearer 50%. At the moment, the in EU Economy, Financial Times, the EU is pondering 60% haircuts for Greek debt, and a fantastic document that went round last night to all the people involved in the talks, saying that yes, even with a 60% haircut, we'll still need Greek bailouts for a decade, and it'll run still to a couple of €100 billion, even with the haircuts. And Ottmar Easing comes in with a warning from the old Bundesbank. Today's Eurozone policymakers are practicing financial alchemy and risking hyperinflation, he says. Still a well-respected man in Germany, apparently, and his article finishes with these wise words. The expansion of the EFSF Rescue Fund was barely agreed before discussions began on how to leverage the €440 billion. Just as the alchemists couldn't create gold from lesser materials, known methods can't overcome limited means without cost. It's obvious that political pressure will lead to an increase in the amount of funds being allocated. For example, even a small widening in the bond spreads on one country could be enough for a request for funds. It wouldn't be surprising if even a substantially increased fund would soon be deemed as too little to cope with the growing uses. The Treaty for Monetary Union expressly forbids monetary financing of the public sector. Whoever considers abolishing this ban exposes countries and politics access to the printing press. A look at history of currencies, for instance Germany's, shows the unavoidable results. Easing will certainly be against firing up the printing presses at the ECB to get everyone out of the poo. This chart gives us the reasons for what's gone wrong here. Going back into the 90s, those are the bond spreads on the various countries, Portugal, Spain, Ireland, France and Italy, completely and utterly flattened out during the Euro time, where everyone said that no spread over bonds at all. All these sovereign debts are of the same debt risk. But since Lehman collapse, they've gone horrendously back again, and they're actually doing their research and finding those risks aren't exactly the same as Germany's on Italy, France, Ireland, Spain and Portugal. UK, Frank Knight and the market report sharp reversal in house price expectations as sentiment among public sector workers slump. Obviously London holding up, but anywhere outside London falling down. Almost a north-south divide. Anything north is bad, anything south is just about holding on. But an interesting paragraph from that report. Only households with an income of more than £58,000 a year expect their house price to rise next year. All households with smaller incomes expect prices to fall. With those in the income bracket between 15,000 and 23,000 anticipating the sharpest declines, and they're probably right. Finish with politics and policy in the Financial Times. Soaring prices push the Queen close to fuel poverty. The Queen is coming perilously close to joining millions of her subjects in fuel poverty as energy bills for 4 palaces and drafty castles absorb a rising share of her income. About 4 million households in England have fallen into fuel poverty, a situation in which homeowners must spend 10% of their annual income to keep their abode acceptably warm. I hope you keep your abode acceptably warm. As you can see, the wood is burning in the background there, keeping Mystic Land acceptably warm, out of fuel poverty. Thank you. Bye.